Yeah, a long way from a stuttering kid. I didn't get enough love.
Welcome to another episode of the How Men Cry podcast. I'm your host, as always, Dxtr Spits. And today I am lucky and fortunate enough to bring on an amazing guest. I am a resident artist for the SETI Institute and was fortunate enough to have, drum roll please, Sir Bill Diamond. How are you today?
Good, Dexter. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Great.
Would you like to give just the listeners at home maybe just a bit of an intro of who you are, the role you play at SETI, and the basics.
Sure. Yeah. Well, as Dexter said, I'm Bill Diamond. I'm the CEO at the SETI Institute, which is in Mountain View, California, and we have the somewhat unusual mission statement of leading humanity's quest to understand and seek out life in the universe and understand the conditions under which it can exist and the nature that life beyond Earth might take, and whether or not we can find evidence of life beyond Earth. I think it's kind of a hopeful endeavor for humanity in general, and it answers one of those age-old, profound questions in science and philosophy, which is, are we alone in the universe? And we, of course, at the SETI Institute think it's very unlikely, but that's our mission, to undertake the search and understand our place in the cosmos and humanity's place in the cosmos and where we fit in and what else is out there. So, and in addition to our science and research, we have about 100 PhD scientists at the Institute doing mostly NASA-funded research programs, but a lot of independently funded programs, and we have activities in education and outreach as well to engage the public in what we think is a shared interest in this sort of fascinating domain.
So very, very simple work. You're not taking on anything difficult at all. Just, trying to find more life and existence within the universe. So
yeah, basic stuff like, how does life happen, under what conditions, where else might those conditions exist? Is there life on Mars? Is there life out in the cosmos? We use some interesting technology, radio telescopes, optical telescopes, spaceborne telescopes, and do laboratory research work and field expeditions around the world. And of course, also we try and interpret and understand the work that we do through an artist's eyes. And that's why having people like Dexter in our Artists in Residence program is so fantastic, because it brings a different perspective and dimension to our work that I think is actually enriching and enlightening.
Oh, sorry. I think I might be muted there for a second. I don't know if it cut out. I don't know if I did that or not.
What are you hearing me now?
Nope, that might have been my mistake.
Okay.
The last little bit there, you were saying is the SETI Air Program. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. Just that the SETI Air Program is another dimension to what we do at the Institute. It gives artists, including Dexter, an opportunity to interpret the science and the research that's done at the Institute. And conversely, it gives the scientists an opportunity to work with an artist to see their own work and to perceive their own work through a different lens and through a different perspective. And I think it's very enlightening. I hope in both directions, for the artists and for the scientists and for the work we do. And it's another way as well to interact and engage with the public.
Yeah, and I love that. And I can definitely say, from my personal experience, I'm working with Anne Marie on several projects now, and we're actually brainstorming a lot of really cool and crazy visuals. I can't wait to start to shoot what we're looking to do with you all. But it does add a lot of perspective, because what I realize is, you can't help but think of, I think the questions that I know I ponder personally, like I do a lot of camping and hiking and other stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, a background as well in STEM. And I think some of the most fascinating questions that we have you know, just from being human, some of the best ones are the ones that we may or may not ever get answers to.
Sure.
But I think just that seeking and even contemplation, you know, on those different answers is what I think gives that project and just the whole program some life for sure. Yeah, do you feel like, you know, doing work or just like leading the work at SETI makes you think about, you know, your own place within the cosmos often?
Oh, absolutely. I guess it makes me think of my own place, but perhaps more generally, it makes me think broadly and generally about humanity's place in the cosmos. And it's interesting because, you know, the science of the study of life in the universe has a name now, and it's called astrobiology. It was actually coined by NASA. And answering the question, are we alone in the universe, is one of the top three science questions at the space agency. So their top three science questions are, how does the universe work? How did we get here? And are we alone? And so these are really interesting questions. And they ultimately do get to, what is our place in all of this? How did we get here? Has life sprung up elsewhere? And if so, under what conditions, and can we find it? It just seems, you know, bizarre and statistically unlikely beyond all expectations that in this vast universe of billions of galaxies, hundreds of billions of galaxies, each of which contains hundreds of billions of stars, each of which we now know factually contains hundreds of billions of planets, probably more planets than stars in each galaxy. So the likelihood that this is the only little planet on the edge of a rather insignificant average galaxy is the only place where life and intelligence has sprung up seems very, very remote. But and I think also that the endeavor and the question helps us put humanity in a different perspective. You know, when you look at the world and at Earth from a planetary perspective, it's a planetary body with lots of living species on this, and we all share this resource. We all share this island, and I would like to think that you know, we could do a lot better by uniting together than being against one another, in both in the context of understanding our place, but also in how the search for life beyond Earth and for trying to understand those kinds of questions can make us reflect upon ourselves and think, you know, we are really all united. We're all part of the same family, and we should actually start behaving in that manner, you know, more consistently than we have throughout history.
No, definitely. And that actually kind of leads into a question that I was going to ask. And I think that you're spot on about that. You know, I think one of the things that makes it difficult to sometimes have those thoughts is because of, you know, just the busyness or the different, you know, hardships that maybe folks are going through, or just how intense the world can be at times. But I think you're absolutely right that there's this like fundamental fabric of connection that I think sometimes really gets overlooked because of some of those factors, you know, and then we kind of focus, I guess, more on those things. So yeah, I was kind of maybe one of the questions I was kind of leaning towards, you know, is it do you find yourself spending a lot of time within the noise of maybe what's happening within the world, let's say politically or, you know, socially, you know, or do you just, you know, kind of try to keep the focus on the hope of, I would say, finding things better, and I mean, by finding things, I mean finding life within within
Sure.
the universe, you know, or I guess how do you keep your mental space within all of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. And I'm glad you used the term noise. You know, I think that in many respects, questions like, you know, are we alone in the universe? And the connection that questions like that have to such big questions like, has humanity, you know, permanently and irrevocably changed our climate in ways that are adverse and ultimately threatening? You know, these kinds of big picture issues do suffer from what I call a signal to noise problem. And, you know, the noise is, of course, the everyday distractions, but at the same time, realities of life, you know, political dynamics, social dynamics, war and conflict, you know, economics, and am I putting food on the table for my family tonight, and so on. And of course, for most individuals, the here and now is what's important and what matters. But at the same time, I think it's important for us to be able to step back and look beyond the here and now. But it is, of course, hard to do when the noise level of all the daily activity that you can see and get overwhelmed on just by turning on the TV news or listening to the radio, that constant buzz and hum of information, much of which is rather sad or depressing, creates a tough situation. And of course, there'll be people who think like, how does an endeavor like yours really move the needle for mankind? How is this helping us or helping anybody? And I'm struggling just to make ends meet. And what are you guys doing this? And this is a fair question. But I think the answer is that one of the things that we're doing in this endeavor is we're exercising humankind's curiosity. Yeah. And I think that the one thing that unites us all as a species, as human beings, is our curiosity. And ultimately, it's our curiosity that can also lead to things like technologies and potential solutions to some of the problems that we have created. At the same time, I think it's really interesting, we in this long-term perspective, I mean, we think in millions and hundreds of millions and billions of years, and we think in distances in light years or hundreds of thousands of light years or millions of light years. So we think in time scales, time frames, and distances that the average person, doesn't really think about on a daily basis. But one of the things that's interesting is if we think about the course of human history, from even before recorded human history. I mean, human history is marked with conflict and the rise and fall of civilizations and nations and nation states and governments and political realms and so forth. And in the long term perspective, none of that matters, right? Yep. None of that really has any determining effect on will humanity be around here 1,000 years from now, or 10,000 years, or 100,000 years from now? None of it matters. Of course, it mattered in the here and now for those people and those individuals and civilizations at the time. It matters in terms of what historical context led us to where we are now, but it doesn't have anything to do with predicting our long-term sustainability and viability as a species on this planet. Yeah. So none of that matters. Then came invention. Then came, the Industrial Revolution. And first the steam engine, and then the internal combustion engine, and then basically the production or the extraction and consumption of fossil fuels. And for the first time in our 5,000 years of recorded human history and several 100,000 years of human history, we're making an impact. Our behavior, our actions are impacting our environment and the climate in which we live in, and therefore our long-term sustainability. So the first time in human history, what we're doing actually matters for thousands of years from now, where everything else that we've done before now hasn't really mattered for thousands of years from now. And in the context of SETI, what's interesting is what we're doing to our environment is actually something that some other civilization light years away from here could look at our planet and observe. Yeah. They can actually now see the impact of human presence on this planet because of the increased carbon dioxide levels in our atmosphere and how that there's clearly something going on this planet because their atmosphere is changing, and it's changing rapidly, and it's changing in a dangerous way. This is something we're actually imparting on our environment, something that could be observed and witnessed from great distances, who otherwise would have no idea that there's even life forms on this planet. Yeah. It'd be just too far away. So, these are things that we think about both in the context of, the signal to noise question and, the relevance and importance question in terms of what we're doing. Yes, we can't work in isolation, and we can't focus on our work and be either ignorant of or not aware of, the noise problem or what's going on in the rest of the world while we go about our business.
Yeah, I mean, and it makes me just think of perspective and in general, just this idea of like continuings of shifts in perspective, I think, is kind of like one of the main things, you know, that I was taking from that, is like how you look at the world and life and humanity and existence. I think one of the things that I landed on from just spending a lot of time like alone camping or kind of sitting in nature
Yeah.
and doing a lot of stargazing really is just like this idea of you're in this snapshot of history in this one moment, and it's just kind of ironic that we almost look at ourselves as the center of the universe in so
Yeah.
many ways, like
Right.
through our day-to-day everything. I mean, and if you ask an Instagram influencer, they're definitely the center of the universe.
Right. Right.
So so it's just really ironic. But you know, I've in my own regards like have tried to, you know, walk myself back from kind of like placing judgment on that and just kind and like you know, trying to attribute it more to the perspective of where that, you know, person is, or you know, how they grew up, or what they, you know, kind of have found within their life has led them to those conclusions. But I
Sure.
definitely agree that there's this like deeper fabric of discussion and ways to look at humanity and how we've been on the planet, and what that potential longevity is. And
Yeah.
I think that is also fascinating, you know, to kind of take a step back and say, hey, we are actually at a point where we are having a different type of influence from what we've created.
Yeah.
And you know, this can go a different direction depending on how we decide to move forward in terms of, are we going to be aware of the footprint that we're leaving, or you
Exactly.
know, of how sustainable things are, or not.
Yeah.
And it brings to me, so how did you, maybe just from like growing up, you know, did you always know that you wanted to maybe go into a field of study like this, or is that something that came into place like later in life for you?
Sure. Well, I was always interested in science, and you know, I grew up in the era of, you know, the Mercury and Gemini and Apollo programs. I was a little boy, but watched the landing on the moon in July of 1969 live on a black and white TV, and you know, so I grew up in that era of wonder, and I enjoyed reading science fiction and nonfiction. I enjoyed reading people like Arthur C. Clarke and of course Carl Sagan, and programs like Cosmos, and so all of those things. So I knew that I wanted to be in the sciences. That was what really interested me. When I was in the sixth grade, I was convinced, because we started studying it, that I'm going to be a geneticist. You know, like that was really, really interesting. But beyond that, you know, I just really was always interested in astronomy and astrophysics and cosmology. You know, things like stars and planets and galaxies were just fascinating concepts for me, and things which really stretch the imagination in terms of, can we even contemplate what billions means? Can we even imagine how big a single galaxy is, let
Yeah.
alone the fact that there are 600, you know, hundreds of billions of other galaxies? I mean, they're almost incomprehensible notions, which make them attractive to me, because I'm sort of an incomprehensible thinker. But so yeah, and I ended up studying physics in college, and then going into technology. I spent most of my career in fiber optics and photonics, lasers, and things of that sort, most of which enabled what we're doing now, most of which were basically providing the hardware that is the underlying technology to the internet, you know, allowing communications. But having the opportunity to come to the SETI Institute, particularly, you know, late in my career. I mean, at my age, this is, you know, probably the last hurrah. And yet I couldn't imagine ending in a better place. I mean, you mentioned that concept of coming full circle. I feel like I've come full circle. I've come back to my childhood and come back to that initial connection and that early connection with how fascinating topics like this are. And so I feel absolutely, you know, blessed and very fortunate to have had this opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. And yeah, it is. It's great to have that kind of full circle thing happen for you, as for sure, because
Yeah.
I think feeding and continuously kind of tapping into what that child self wants. It's probably how you end up being the happiest. I think where that ends up, where we go south with that sometimes is by not acknowledging or kind of suppressing just that general curiosity.
Yeah.
So I have a few questions to kind of switch gears here, and I'll actually bridge it using the Seti Air program a bit. So with the Seti Air program, which is essentially bringing together artists from all different backgrounds to partner up and work with different SETI scientists and engineers to partner up and kind of make pieces of art and creation. It definitely starts to tap into more of a I would say vulnerable side of humanity and partnering it with something like STEM. So what do you hope that people gain from experiencing some of the art that is created from the different artists within the program?
Well, I think there's, I've got lots of hopes and expectations about what this program can do for the Institute. One of them at a very direct level is that, in talking to the scientists who've worked with artists for, sources of inspiration for their work, I know that the scientists have often said, it's been such a fantastic experience and an eye-opening experience because I've never looked at my own work through this kind of a lens, through an artistic perspective, and to have my work interpreted in a way that I would not have even thought of necessarily sort of opens up my own mind and my own thinking about the work that I'm doing. And so when you hear that kind of response from the scientists, well, first of all, you're onto something good and important. Yeah. But hopefully that also means that this kind of work can also connect with the public. I mean, there are certainly going to be members of the public who are perhaps more interested in arts and creative processes than scientific endeavors, though I think scientific endeavors are also highly creative, but in a different way. So if people who might not necessarily be curious or interested in the kinds of subjects we pursue at the Institute have the opportunity to experience art that is inspired by the kind of work we do at the Institute, whatever the art form may be, whether it's dance or spoken word or poetry or painting or sculpture or what have you, or theater. I think this gives us an opportunity to engage a broader cross-section of the public by saying, look, these are two different sides of the same coin. And maybe by looking at something visual or experiencing something audibly or in physical presence, you enter a world that you're not otherwise familiar with or don't have a connection to. Maybe it sparks an interest, and you say, wow, that's a very cool thing. I'd like to learn more about the science behind it, or I'd like to see other artistic interpretations of different kinds of science. Like just this notion of exploring the intersection between art and science is maybe something I'd like to do more or understand better. So I just see the AIR program is a fantastic way to not only look at and perceive our work through a different lens and put it in a different context, but also to engage a broader cross-section of the public in terms of the kind of work we do and maybe get people interested. And even if they end up only being interested in, just that point of intersection, I mean, intersections are where interesting things happen anyway, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well put. So for you personally and through the context of just the lens of How Men Cry, like I really enjoy how you speak to kind of different points within the arts and STEMs and kind of like bridging these like different roles. To kind of switch gears a bit, how do you relate or maybe think about the word vulnerability personally, and I know just even from conversations and things that we've shared before, some of the work that I've been able to talk about or present, or how I was even introduced to you guys, it was through more of a lens of kind of displaying vulnerability. So just curious to know what the word vulnerability means to you, and how do you relate to it within your life?
Sure. Well, I would say that vulnerability from the perspective of human emotion, I think it's a very interesting topic, and wonderful that you're kind of exploring this, because I think that through so many things are changing now, right? In terms of our perspectives of inclusiveness and diversity and access and so on, we're thinking differently than we've thought before, and I think obviously for the better. And among the issues, I think that could be included in that broad context of diverse concepts, if you will, is vulnerability, right? I mean, traditionally, men are not supposed to be emotionally vulnerable, it seems.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of grew up that way. And, fathers of my father's generation were like, boys don't cry and things of that sort. And yet I think we're also seeing how important the expression of vulnerability can be for mental health. That's suppressing emotions and emotional responses because you think that's the right thing to do, or you've been taught that way, or culturally that's sort of what's reinforced, is very detrimental to human health. And I think we've seen some stunning examples, particularly in like the Olympics and professional sports very recently, with incredibly talented athletes, world-class, top of the heap athletes, struggling with emotional well-being, mental health. And so I think their struggles help bring this topic to the fore, and I think that's important. I think I also am of the type myself that, oh, no, you don't cry when this happens. You don't get upset. But I do find myself able to be sad or to cry. And I mean, even at movies, and my wife will make fun of me. You'll be watching a movie and there'll be some romantic scene where it all works out well, or some other romantic scene where it's an absolute disaster, and I'll be a little bit like this, look over me, say, "You crying?" Like, what's going on here? I'm like, no, not at all. No, don't worry, it's all good. Just sniffling, hay fever, I think. But so I think it's important, and then also if you're a male and you see a male figure that's important to you, like a boss or a father or an uncle or a grandfather or something like that, and you see their vulnerability, at least when I was little, this was a stunning thing to see, right? Shocking. Wow. Almost, right? Like to see the first time I saw my own father cry, it's shocking. Like, wow, This doesn't happen. This isn't supposed to happen. Wow. But then you realize, oh, this person is also a human being. That dads aren't just this thing called dad. They're also people. They have emotions. And it's very powerful. So I think also, for anybody who's in the position of being, in a position of influence, whether it be a father or a relative or a teacher or a boss or a colleague, can express vulnerability. I think it's very healthy. And it helps other people realize, and men in particular, oh, I guess this is okay. That's probably a good thing.
Yeah, no, I love it, and I appreciate you just even kind of speaking to that in terms of the range or the upbringing, because I had a lot of that experience too, just in terms of it's kind of crazy how powerful like the narratives that we're surrounded by can be in terms of how they influence you. Because you're right, it's like the fact that you said it's like, wow, to actually see tears fall or something at some point, it's like, oh, this is such a shocking thing. It's like, right. It's probably only that shocking because of just how strong the rest of the like narrative is. And do you feel like you've ever had to maybe just personally challenge or like overcome any of that just for the betterment of your, relationships or even your own mental health? Do you feel like you've had to kind of push back against some of those narratives around vulnerability?
Well, I would say that, the narratives haven't been so narrative in nature. In other words, it hasn't been so much about, voices or observations saying, no, you can't do this, you can't have that kind of emotion, but more that maybe the subtle signals,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe they were narratives, maybe they were words, when I was a little boy, and friends or older kids or parents or relatives said, you don't cry, boys don't cry. So there was probably some of that, but I would say, as you get older, you're not so aware of overt signals of that sort, but certainly much more subtle signals of that sort, whether it's in movies or in books and literature or what have you, that's a signal. So I haven't necessarily felt that I've had to push back,
Mm-hmm.
but rather to say, it's okay if I when I lose it, it's okay.
Yeah.
I remember, for example, when my father passed away, and I had seen him just a couple of weeks beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
and my wife and I had just gotten married. A few months earlier, her father was suffering from cancer. He died after we were married, like a couple of months later, and 1 month later, my father died. So you're talking
Oh,
about,
wow.
one wedding and 2 funerals, boom, boom, boom. So it was
Wow.
a very emotional time from the get-go. And I remember when my father died, none of us were actually at his side when he passed, but we'd been there just before and after. And I remember, not crying, being sad, but also being, somewhat philosophical, like, hey, he lived a good long life and he was happy and healthy for most of his life. So, it's okay. It's all okay.
Yeah.
And then, through all of the other ceremonial aspects of dying, the funeral home and the funeral, and didn't cry, then went to the cemetery, and, then that casket got dropped into the ground. I lost it.
Yeah.
It was like all that pent up emotion that had been there but been suppressed, all that time, it came out. And but then I had to say to myself and anybody else who cared, that's okay. That's important. It's important to let go. It's important to let that out. And I think the other, I've been lucky enough to have a family that I think feels the same way by and large. So, if we were there to support each other when we go through those events, whatever the source may be, and it's like, it's okay, let it go, let it out, and that's a much healthier response long term.
Yeah, no, I love that, and thank you for my condolences first and foremost. For both of those scenarios. I can only imagine going through something like having a marriage or forming a marriage, and that type of tragic circumstances so nearby.
Yeah, it's quite the roller coaster.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just can only imagine. But then also for just being willing to even share that, because I think that's one of the things that, I hope to convey with, a lot of these interviews, is just that, one, there's a range of there's a range of experiences, and also a range of men who are willing and or take notice to that fact of just letting things go. And I love that terminology of just letting it go, because one of the pieces that I actually wrote for this project is called Boiled, and it talks about just this thing of basically a pot boiling over, from just this continuous containing of whatever it is that's going on, and not letting out the pressure, and things pretty much blowing up. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I
And
mean, it's that kind of vulnerability is obviously a release, and of course there are other forms of release which include things like violence, which are generally not very productive or healthy or
yeah.
desirable. So it may be that by being more open to and encouraging of expressing those vulnerabilities and those emotions, we can be better as human beings. It again, and back in this sort of SETI context or context of a planetary perspective, here we are on a planet, and we are, in theory, at least, the most advanced species on this planet. Yet we're also the only species on this planet capable of violence for violence sake, right?
Yeah.
For no, not for survival,
Mm-hmm.
but for other reasons. And it makes me think, well, what is it about the evolution of complex organisms that actually ultimately leads to an organism that's capable of conscious thought, of technological development, of language and expression and invention, but it's also the most violent species on the planet? I mean, what's with that? Is that
yeah?
And is that inevitable? Is that formulaic? Is that sort of a byproduct of what happens when you get complex organisms that are so advanced and complex that they're capable of all these amazing things that you just get this other nonsense that goes with it? It's really rather stunning. But what is it between men and women that makes men tend to be more violent and more destructive than women? And is it in some way linked to these issues of vulnerability and expression and willingness, and openness about these topics? Because we're, if the other species on this planet were paying attention, which hopefully they're not, we're not setting a good example.
I've jokingly said with buddies anyway, I'm like, if the aliens or whomever else are watching, they're probably like, I don't know.
Yeah. But they're not ready to talk to yet.
Yeah, they're probably like,
they got some things to work out.
Like they gotta go through that. But I'd never quite thought about it through that lens from the standpoint of thinking of all the other marvels that we're capable of. And it's like, what is it about this? Because you're right, like throughout nature, I mean, you have a couple circumstances of behavior that you can say is violent amongst animals, and maybe it seems senseless, but then a lot of the times it is still related to something like them trying to push away like the next mating partner or the next child that might mate with something in the future and whatever else. But I mean, just our ability, it's very clear that we can take things to whole new levels of violence for no reason. And you're right. And through the lens of just with men in general, I think what's powerful about that too is that it doesn't even just always end up being external. It's also like self-harm towards men. I was just looking at data actually right before this call, where basically, it's like men are about 4 times more likely, at least within US data as of 2019, we're about 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women. And, it's not a race of who's doing what more, but that is, it's powerful to say like, what is going on here?
Yeah, it makes you wonder why. What's behind that?
Yeah,
it's
and
not
I'm sure
random when it's that big a difference.
So, and that's I just appreciate you speaking to that. So I have one more question. It's kind of a bit of a 2-part question, but how I like to close out the episodes. And this question is, what do you feel that the world could use more of from men? So what can men contribute more to the world?
Well, yeah, that's a big question. A lot would be my answer. I think, first, for men to get along with men would be a good start. For us to get along with and value one another, whatever our backgrounds or ethnicity or religious perspectives or what have you. If we could get past those really rather superficial elements into what makes us human, and then move into the things that really matter. To me, it doesn't matter what country you're from, what language you speak, what color your skin is, what your sexual preference is. none of that matters. To me, what matters is, what are we doing individually and collectively as men, but also as human beings in general, about our future and about the ongoing sustainability and survivability of our species. Right now we're behaving in a manner, and we have for most of human history, that again takes no long-term view. Businesses don't look beyond the next fiscal quarter, right? And politicians don't look beyond the next, election term or cycle, and we don't look beyond, the next job or what have you. And as a result, the thing that gets lost and that we don't think about is, what about our children or our grandchildren and generations, 500 years or 1,000 years from now? Are they even going to be possible based on, the direction we're headed? So one of the things that men can do is stop being men and start being human, and start saying, we're all in this together, and we are, sharing an island. Of course, again, in a signal to noise perspective, the average person thinks this is a massive planet. It's this huge sink and it can absorb everything I'm doing. It's not the case. It's an island with finite resources. And as you step back and look at it from further and further away, you appreciate that more and more. You're probably familiar with Carl Sagan and the pale blue dot.
Yeah.
This amazing photograph of Earth taken from the distance of Saturn, where it's just this tiny little blue dot in the sky. And Sagan points out in this marvelous sort of poem, I'd love to hear you do a spoken word version of it, actually, where he talks about, every king and queen, every corrupt politician, every leader, every genius, every lover, every person that's ever known or existed, has been on this tiny little pale blue dot.
Wow.
And, you just looking at it from that perspective, like, we're all here on this tiny little island. We need to start thinking along those lines and thinking in a different cosmological context, that if we want life on this little pale blue dot to continue, we've got to start behaving in a different manner and be united in from my point of view, in addressing and battling the definitive issue of our time, which right now for me is climate change, and all the social and political and geopolitical strife, which is important and it affects everybody's lives. It is something, of course, we have to pay attention to, but none of it matters in the long term if we don't address, what is happening to our planet as a result of our own actions and behavior. And so that's, one thing I would like to see men do is come to grips with that and start saying, we got to actually stop wrestling with each other and beating each other up in the corner over here, because over here, we're killing our planet, and we're all in this together. And if we care about the future of humanity, we should start focusing on that.
I love it. Just very, very well put. Poetic, man. I'm telling you, that was poetic.
I've got some literary types in my family. It's through the genes, but probably buried in me somewhere.
it's in there. It's really poetic, and I couldn't agree more. The word perspective, it's like, it's resonating within my mind for sure. And then kind of a flip of that question is, how do you think the world can help men to get there? What else can be done within the world to help us to get there?
Well, I think doing things like asking questions such as you are doing, bringing awareness to some of these important topics, making certain topics and points of discussion acceptable, and more okay. Like, the essence of this is how men cry. It's like, guys, it's okay, right? and by the way, it's also important, and it can lead to some very good things. So I think doing more of that kind of thing. I don't know that it's like what the world can do for men, but what the world in terms of men and women can do for each other is really the thing. It's like Kennedy said, when you don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. If I were the world, I'd say, like, don't ask what the world can do for you, ask what you can do for the world. I think our individual actions, and then setting examples through our behavior and our actions, how we are with our children, with our peers, with our coworkers, with our fellow men and women. That's important. Exploring questions such as you are doing, being willing to ask questions that we otherwise don't like to pay attention to. I think this is also an issue of like climate change. It's one of the things is it's a scary topic. And, until it has really come around to slap us in the face, which it is doing now in terms of, storms and floods and fires and temperature rise and so on, it's been one of those things like, no, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about that. And
it's not a happy topic.
No, it's not a happy topic. It's a challenging one, but it's one that is also, by the way, full of opportunity for invention and creativity and discovery about, how we can build awareness, how we can build an understanding, and how we can address and deal with it and mitigate it. But that's going to, this challenge is going to take unprecedented levels of cooperation and multinational support. Nations that might otherwise not really have anything in common or any desire to work together. We're going to have to actually start to say, we're on the same, we share the same island, guys. Let's work together on this problem, and let's stop putting it, sweeping it under the rug and just being worried about, the here and now and in the signal to noise problem. We've got to face this and deal with it. So I do hope that, that it's what we can do for each other and for the world is something that projects like yours and others exploring important questions that help us get there, help us be better, are good things.
Oh, just thank you. Thank you so much just for all of the insight and just information. I mean, it's really been just a wonderful conversation. I appreciate just the different points of vulnerability, as well as just the other, thoughts to kind of give people stuff to think deeper about, and to kind of question our place here on the little pale blue dot and our relationship to each other. So again, Bill, I mean, I really, really appreciate you taking the time out. It was a little bit short notice for me too, but I'm like, I really felt like this was a valuable talk, and it definitely lived up to that for me. So I just want to say thank you again for giving your time and your story.
Well, it's a pleasure. I love having the opportunity to talk with you. I think what you're doing is wonderful and important, and also great, to hear what you're doing with Anna on the artist in residence side. And
yeah, we got
to hear more about that.
Yeah, we have. So we've been storyboarding out things a bit, and she's gathering some images and other things to kind of back what we're doing, and then basically planning. I don't want to give away too much, but planning on and well, we've already started with some of the music and stuff, but working on the actual visuals to kind of bring together a little short film kind of project that we're working on. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I look forward to it, and we won't. And even if I get to see it early, we won't say anything about it until you're ready to roll it out. But sounds exciting. Can't wait.
Yeah, sounds good. So again, thank you and take care. I'm gonna kick us both out of this room, and then I'll be thinking deeply for the rest of the evening. So you can I can thank you for that. I'll be over here contemplating my normal my normal camping existential crisis will probably be floating around today in my head.
There you go. Well, I love camping and backpacking, and my wife and I were just up in Mendocino County, really with not much out there except nature, and that's such a wonderful thing to be able to do. So yeah. I'm with you on the camping and getting out in nature side. It's there's nothing like it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah. Well, you take care, and for any of the listeners, if you want to find out more about the How Men Cry project, you can always visit howmencry.com and submit a story, or How Men Cry on Instagram. Also, check out SETI and just the amazing work. The SETI Institute is on social media, but also and it's SETI.
SETI.org.
SETI.org is the it's the website.
We're active on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and so forth. So if you're interested and curious, please come along for the journey. Love to have you.
Awesome.
And you'll see more about what Jordan and his colleagues are up to as well.
Yeah.
Totally cool.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, you take care. Have a good rest of your evening. I'm gonna kick us both out of this room and play a little goodbye music. But thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Cheers, Dexter. Thanks.
So, all right.
Yeah, a long way from a stuttering kid. I didn't get enough love.